Greetings, building science enthusiasts, and welcome back to the Building Science Podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Humid Climate Conference. Back in 2015, the Austin chapter of Passive House Alliance US was thinking about how to get more attention to the FIAS Plus 2015 standard in humid climates. And so the thought emerged, what if we put on a conference? I'm proud to tell you that this is an unmissable conference. It's a unique gathering of the best building science minds who are ready to talk seriously about passive house and humid climates. This event is entirely volunteer organized, supported by Passive House Institute US, and sponsored by some of the best product manufacturers and industry consultants in the country. And it's sold out in its first try. But it's happening again this year, May 21st and 22nd, with a great speaker lineup. We're talking Joe Stiebrick, Lou Harriman, Richard Corsi, Matthew Tanteri, and the list literally goes on and on and on. Find out more at humidclimateconference.org. Early bird tickets are limited and they're selling quickly, so don't miss out and be left wondering. Register today. That's humidclimateconference.org for tickets. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode.
Welcome to this.
Welcome to the
Building Science
podcast.
Welcome to the Building Science Podcast.
Bringing the human factor to architecture and design.
Brought to you by Positive Energy in Austin, Texas.
It's recording, and I'm going to go ahead and start. Welcome back to the Building Science Podcast, listeners. This is Miguel here. I'm sitting here with a good friend and colleague, Kimberly Lewellyn, who is a performance construction manager at Mitsubishi Electric US, and she's also a CPHC. Yeah, that's very exciting. Congratulations. And fun fact, she actually used to work at Positive Energy, so this is it's like bringing the family back home. And today we're going to talk about something that we've discussed before, but with a little bit different perspective in mind. We're talking about the idea that if you design around people, that a good building will follow. And in the past episodes that we've discussed this topic, we've really focused and honed in on the notion of the occupant, the owner of the building who's going to live there, and their family being sort of the center, the crux, the centerpiece of that process. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the people involved in delivering that, and how is it that we value those people, and how are they actually behaving in the context of a project team who's in charge of delivering the home in the first place. So, Kimberly, you just delivered a wonderful talk here at the ASHRAE and AHR Expo in Chicago, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this subject.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much, Miguel. I'm happy to be here and be talking to you all. You know, I love and deeply respect the work that you do. And
thank you.
Thank you for bringing up this topic, because I think this is the next piece in the puzzle for us to figure out. And what I mean by that is, it's my perspective that over the last 10 years or so, it looks like the industry has really done a pretty good job at embracing the idea of integrated project delivery, IPD. It's become almost an expectation that is how projects will proceed and will be conducted, okay? So what are the indicators of that? We are spending more time in the design phase. We're spending more time in the design phase. We're spending more money in the design phase. And we've added line items to our budgets for consultants that were never there before. The question that I posed during the talk, and this is one that's just hanging out in my mind, is why do we still see this prescriptive box-checking approach to our buildings? If we know we need to integrate, how is it that we end up with projects that are doing integrated design and are going for really ambitious building certifications? How are we ending up with these things that are they're much easier to show on a screen? But, you know, I had an example of a roof that had looked like 10-year-old construction. It was new construction. There was an 1.5 inches of standing water on this brand new roof, and they had installed the drains, check. We installed the drains. We installed the scupper directly over an outdoor unit for a heat pump. But the water is never going to get to that drain until it reaches about three inches of standing water. That's a project that had a lot of eyes on it and a lot of talent on it in the early stages. So how is it that we ended up there? And so this is all framing my answer. This is giving the context. And what I propose is that maybe we have an empty seat at the table, the design table, that we need to consider filling. And that seat has got to be filled by someone who has the actual know-how, who has the field experience. So not somebody who has the piece of paper that says they went to school for that. And not necessarily manufacturers can go a long way to contributing to an early design phase. But I'm talking about the guys in the field who actually do the work and who have been doing the work for 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a lot of exploitation in that world right now. There's a lot of labor crews who are seen as interchangeable and thus treated that way as well. And that's hugely problematic because the bar for accomplishment is actually set so low, and the accountability is not held within this larger context of we're going to do this together, we're going to get this done. It's seen as, well, I passed the liability on to that subcrew, and that's what you're getting. And hopefully we'll be able to cover it up enough that nobody will ever call us about it. What do you think the obstacles are to sort of changing the paradigm in which subs are exploited and operating in this machinery that is actually not supportive of the project?
So I'm going to say the first obstacle that we have. So I'll lay out the obstacles first, and then I'll suggest maybe some things we could do about it. So one of them is fear, which is not surprising. Mm-hmm. Fear motivates us in a lot of ways we're not aware of, and in this case, it's fear of litigation. So people are afraid of being blamed for something not working right, which is really understandable. But if what we're doing with our construction contracts is that we've baked that fear into our process, and we point to other parties in terms of accountability, so that there is literally language that is indemnification language, which means point that accountability elsewhere. It's not me. And everybody else will be held liable for this, but not me. And until we change that, it's going to be an uphill battle.
There's a lot to say about contracts, and we're actually working with the AIA National as well as a couple of construction lawyers in Austin to make an episode specifically about the new integrated project delivery contracts that the AIA redoes every 10 years or so. So stay tuned for that, listeners. It's going to be a really exciting episode.
Excellent. I'm excited. I will be listening. And so another hurdle that we've got is I'm going to say this. I think it's a societal and cultural bias that we have toward four-year educational programs, higher education, and against vocational or technical training. And what's more, vocational or technical trade as a career path, as a respected and valued career path within our society. And so we see that bearing out in the number of high school credits that are being completed. So high school students are enrolling in less and less technical training. There are programs that still exist, but the credits are declining every year. We also are seeing that even as with that trend, as those credits are declining, it's other technical training programs that are flourishing, like computer programming and healthcare. So what that means for the construction portion of that, the electrical, the mechanical, is that it's in a deep decline. And concurrently, we have increasing demand for construction labor. So big disconnect there. And what is the American dream? What is the American dream? I'm going to say that if I just, made a big generalization here, two of the cornerstones would be own a house and go to college. Reverse that. Go to college and own a house. And that everybody should do that and have that opportunity. And I'm not speaking against that, but when we say college, we mean 4-year degree.
Sure.
And we are telling our kids from a very early age that they got to go to college, and we mean a 4-year college. But when you look at the statistics, success rates of four-year college students, the dropout rate's almost 50%, it's 45%. And students on average are walking away from 4-year degrees with at least $40,000 in debt. And that total debt number adds up to $1.4 trillion, which is 10% of the whole publicly held debt. So this is big. And what I want to point our attention to is this is a money-making machine, okay? So there might be other motivations at work that are not actually about the education of our children and about their success as they move into the working population.
Absolutely. And there are, in other parts of the world, there are models where vocational paths are more readily presented and offered as you can definitely do this. This is a respected way to do it. And it's crucial for infrastructure. The Internet of Things is fascinating, and it is absolutely changing the shape of how we think about space and how we understand it in a more data-intensive way. Yeah. But that doesn't change the fact that there needs to be someone to construct and put together the space in the first place. And so where is the bridge, right? How do we actually marry those two worlds in a way that's really productive and meaningful to society?
Absolutely. And how do we maybe romanticize the trades a little? Because we've romanticized the idea of having everything be easy. Mm-hmm. And, field work by nature of what it is laborious. It's hard. It's not easy. So we've got some contradictions in messaging that we need to figure out. Like, how do we do that? Right. This is a little bit off topic, but maybe not really. Where we live in Austin and in several other places, like St. Augustine, Florida, like you see this trend of craft cocktails and bars popping up, where there are young people who are really into learning the trade of mixology. Yeah. It has a new name even, right? Uh-huh. And it's been and a lot of these guys and gals, they dress the part, and they are well studied, and they have taken seriously this skill, which a few years ago was not on the map. And so I ask myself, can we do that with plumbers and electricians? How could we do that? How can we bring the respect back to that trade from the outside and from the inside? How can we do that? So, in the presentation, it wasn't easy to give this. It was uncomfortable because not data and facts. I have labor statistics and some numbers like that, but this is harder to address because this is about people, and it's about a part of people that we don't really know that much about, right?
Yeah, and so much. We have an episode out on the podcast with James Gepner, specifically about behavior change and particularly applying sort of the models of encouraging behavior change that we have available to us now to really help people rethink about how they value a well-built home, right? But there's so much more at play. In order for the entire circle to sort of come to fruition, those same models need to be applied to the pieces of that puzzle that actually make the home exist in order to be purchased in the first place. What are your thoughts about the varying degrees and levels of how we actually change that narrative? What are the practical means by which we can start exploring how to make it seem a more noble profession to be an installer or a plumber, for example?
So 3 steps: training or education, engagement, and compensation. I think those are the 3 elements that we have to figure out.
I'll say those one more time for everybody.
Yeah. So training, engagement, and compensation. So for the training piece, I encourage anybody who's interested to go do some research on what are your VOTEC? What are your community colleges? Who are they, and what are they doing? And are you in a position to connect somehow, to connect those training programs to projects? Because when I was at IBS just a week and a half ago, I had a group from Florida Technical College come up to me, and Professor Rob, who was one of the professors in their HVAC division, wanted to talk shop, and which I was very honored that he came over and got into it with me. So I asked him, I said, so what are your apprenticeship programs like? Because I think the field experience is a key part of education. And he said, it's near impossible for us to get apprenticeships going with HVAC contractors because the liability for them is just too high. So I started talking to a couple of our area managers about, what about a manufacturer? Like, is that something we could do? Like, could we connect our service group to that? So that's a piece of the training. Like, what can we do to get students in there? Get students into training, encourage them, and show them that this is actually a respected career path. And the next stage of it is engagement, and that has to do with the process that you were just talking about. I would suggest, and I'm just coming up with this, more or less on the fly, but I would suggest that we probably need a line item in our budgets for input from skilled trades at the design phase, even if they're not the ones who end up on the job, because sometimes a GC hasn't been figured out in design phase. We all need to identify those people who have those field skills that are the child of labor, of field work, of many years of it, hundreds of projects. These people exist, and yet those are when you talk about exploitative, I use that word very cautiously, and yet I have several people in my life who have these actual field, real world experience, decades behind them, and they routinely get called for advice, like, hey, I got this situation, what do you think? That's a little exploitative to me, actually.
Absolutely.
And I think it happens because we haven't fully acknowledged that contribution, that knowledge only comes from, you don't get a degree for that. You don't get a piece of paper. You don't get letters after your name for that kind of work. And so we have to figure out a different way to acknowledge that. That quote, the Vitruvius / Socrates quote that I made about wouldn't it be, that I read at the presentation, wouldn't it be nice if people had windows on their breasts so that we could see what they're made of? And he meant both personality-wise, vice and virtue, but also what are the knowledge and skills. So it's not easy, because people can talk good talks and people can make it sound like they know stuff they don't. But I would put forth that you can discern real skill.
Absolutely, and to that end, we advocate for HVAC installers to be involved in the early stages of the design process, and we look at their involvement as such a crucial piece of feedback for us, because if we design a system that is not buildable, that is out of the realm of possibility, that's a huge problem, because we've just introduced a costly predicament for that project team. And by taking that feedback and taking it seriously and actually advocating for them to get not only the space, but to get them at the table to say, this is pretty realistic. We can see this working, and they know that because they've done so many. And it really does oftentimes require someone who's not the lowest bidder in the project, and that's part of that reality of we don't really value that compensation. So maybe speak a little more to that. Okay,
so what I think we're both speaking to is restructuring the process a little bit, right? Like defining the empty seat and saying we need somebody with this skill set to sit here. So that's budget, and that's a process change.
You're here.
We can do it. We can absolutely do it.
I've seen it done.
Yeah, exactly. We've done it. But to be honest, I don't always do it.
Correct. And
that pull to sit back into our default mode, which is, oh my gosh, everything's moving so fast, and I don't have time, and I can't convince the owner to spend the money, and we have to quiet all of those voices and remind ourselves that we're trying to do something different here. So we got to reframe.
Absolutely. Maybe for our listeners who aren't necessarily in that decision-making role or even on a project team, what's a way that they can sort of practically affect maybe the perception of how, like, what does it mean to be a tradesperson? Who are the tradespeople in my life? What can we leave with them that sort of points to that?
So it's such a great question, and I think it's the point, because we can really only change ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where it's got to start. We have to start with ourselves. So I put a slide of my two sons up on the screen, 10 and 11, and I publicly admitted my own bias. When if somebody asks me, oh, so are you encouraging your sons to take technical training classes in high school? I'm like, well, that had not occurred to me, right? Mm-hmm. That I'm part of the problem. And so I need to look at that. That's one thing. And then what you just pointed to, we all have skilled trades in our lives. I'm willing to bet most of us do. Mm-hmm. Talking more to those people and asking them what their perspectives are. Yeah. And bringing them into these conversations, not leaving it till it's too late. Like, let's engage.
Hear, hear. And fun fact for you listeners, those little boys that you heard were actually the voices of our intro song for a long time.
Welcome to the Building Science Podcast. Welcome to the Building Science Podcast.
So you've probably heard them many times. Well, Kimberly, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation. I appreciate you taking the time, and it's really good to see you again. And thank you all so much for listening.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.